Our design thinkers, we are going to be building an advanced table inside of Figma. We use a little bit of their auto layouts, and then we're going to be getting into components and how we can use components and instances to then quickly build out a table automatically. So if that interests you, then please sit back, relax, and let's jump into the video. All right, we are here inside of Figma. We're going to be creating our ultimate table. So this will be the first part of a two-part series, and this is just going to be the quick get a table built and understand the auto layouts, understand the components, and how we can quickly put it together. So this is the first part. The second part's the more advanced. We are going to be basically building this guy over here, this responsive table grid with components that basically will allow us to quickly fill it up. And eventually, when we get into the ultimate final one, which is part 2, we will have this table. So all we really need to do is actually build a couple of very simple components. And with these simple components, we'll be able to actually quickly populate this entire table. Just a couple of notes to understand the concept. So a table's simple. We have rows, we have columns. Inside a column, we'll have a header, we'll have a row, we'll have something at the bottom, which I call a footer. Inside of our row, which is like either it can be a row that has a record, or it could be a row that has no record. We will have to build out a component which is going to actually act as what's called a record slot. We are going to also have our cell. Inside of a row, we actually have multiple cells. Let's actually quickly build out these two slots here. I'm going to start with building out my cell we'll open up my frame to make a frame, which is going to be 100 by 100. I will actually just quickly give it a fill. I'm just going to copy over the parameters that I have there, just so we can keep it looking nice and pretty. And a couple of key things to note: this will be an auto layout. I'm going to be centering my content. I do not mind about the padding at the moment. We're going to be keeping this simple. And I will actually copy over this text, which is called text, but it's called cell. Key thing to note, good naming conventions always help you out. I'm going to actually copy over as well the naming convention on my previous cell. And I'm just forcing the text to center itself. I'll make sure that text is filling. There is this additional thing. We don't need that right now. Besides that, is pretty much okay. All it needs to do is it needs to be a component, and it needs to be able to be swapped out from like a different slot. So we'll turn that into our component. There we go. And now what I do need to do is what I'm going to build will be my actual column, which is going to contain my record, which is going to contain this guy. We will build on one first. I'll grab this, and what I want is just this frame. And that's why I've added all this additional spacing, so you can see the layering that we're going to be doing very shortly. I'll add an auto layout over this. I will be calling this my record, and I'm going to call it a slot. And I will also just do the same thing. We'll just copy over those parameters, paste, giving a spacing. When we take this away, that will be how we can modify the actual end result. Now what I have is a record slot. A record will replace this here. I'm going to create and turn it into a component once again. It will actually spit out the actual cell off to the other side, which is great. And then from here, we are actually going to then actually build out our column. It is honestly pretty much identical to this. So instead of us wasting time, you'll notice one thing, this has the horizontal layout. When I duplicate this, I will detach it, and all I will do is switch it to my vertical. Now all I need is another slot, very similar to this one. Why not we just duplicate it, detach it, and instead of this going to be called my slot, I will actually, this will be cascading downwards. So these will be my actual records, because this is going to be my row section. It will all pretty much make sense very shortly, I hope. We will call this our record slot. I will switch that, call that my record. I'm just going to go change that color, and I'm just going to turn it into a component as well. Now this here just needs to be replaced, so we'll replace that guy, and there we go. So I have this, and I will create this. So now I have a replacement for this one. I also have a replacement for this one, which is great. And the magic will actually be starting shortly. The good thing to note is I am going to make sure that this record slot will be replaced. Remember, this is my record. Actually, let's just change that. We're just going to call this record. We'll keep it simple. This will be my record, and my record is going to have multiple cells in it. So let's grab this guy and replace it with this one. Because I have two cells, I'm just going to add a number to it just so I can see it as I replace it. So there's my slot. What I'm going to do is allow for switching, which I can basically add a name. This will be my record. Oh, double R's. And now I'll just press my plus button. There is my record. I will add that in. And now you can switch it out, which is great. So if I was to take my child, we'll take it, duplicate it. I can see the child. I can see that I can switch it to this. Because I can switch it to that now, I can actually, let's first change the text back just because I already know I have this one exactly selected. I actually go copy, I paste it. There we go. Basically, it will add in the cells and it will continue to stack on that axis, which is exactly what I want. Another thing to note is that my record that's inside of here, which is the thing that I replaced, should also be responsive. And now I have a grid that basically will fill up with records cascading down and cells cascading from left to right. And exactly what I want. So what I can do is inside of my piece here is select one object, just one. And I can tell that object that I want to hug it from top to bottom. So the actual cell size, the height of it is fixed, but I will make sure it fills left to right. I make sure that the container around it will hug it from left to right and will also hug from top to bottom. It's also good to note that we'll make sure that this will hug the content as well as the content inside, though fill left to right and will hug from top to bottom. So as I drag, And then all I need to do, make sure the record will fill. And then all I need to do there is drag it out. Done. So now we've basically built the way that we can layer our content in a smart way. Because what we have is actual layered slots. We replace the record with the record row that we built, which is the default record row. And inside of our default record row, we have additional slots, which are our cells, and we can define what type of cells they are. And because we only had one primary record, and that one record is linked to this instance, when I duplicate this guy, it will create another instance of the same one, which is exactly what I want. And all I need to do is just make sure that it will fill. Now, when it comes to components, it's actually quite easy to make sure we can make it default behave the way we do by going to the actual component, Shift A, I can give it a border. Because this is an auto layout, I don't really need to worry too much about the top section. I'm going to give it a space to ignore it. You can also, if you don't want to, you can also use like a dot something as well, but I'm just using a space. But now I have it in an auto layout. What I'll do is I'll give it a quick border. I'll make it white and give it a checker because I like to do, and I will set it to 8 because I also like that. And then we also have 16 just to give it a bit of rounding. Because I have it inside of here, I can actually tell the record slot to fill left to right, hug top to bottom, and do the same here. And we can remove that and grab this, grab the property, and just paste that in up the top. Now this is my cell. Remember, I want my cell to fill left to right, and I want it to hug top to bottom. And there we go. So when I create more of them, it just responds exactly how I want. The same thing for this. If I want to, I can do this. Another auto layer. I can make sure that this will always fill left to hug, top to bottom. I can press Shift Enter, which takes me up my layers. I can then go to the top layer, make sure I paste in that additional, whoops, we'll grab that border again. I know I can remember can never remember the actual shortcut. There we go. So there's our record. I feel left to hug top to bottom, and it's responding nicely inside of that frame that I set up for it. And that's pretty much it. If we want, we could actually just say we can call this a day and we can move on. We got our kind of pseudo responsive frame. You notice that it breaks when it goes too high. The one way we can adjust for that is make sure we just get it to cut, and there you go. But that's not exactly all that I want to do here, because as you may have noticed back on our primary table, we actually have this top strip, and then we also have this bottom strip down the bottom. Same for here, we can have the top and bottom strip. And an easy way for us to do this is to see how we actually have this record. We can actually make a couple of those components, but we don't need to make the one exactly of this record. All we need is to make it of the parent, which is of this record, which actually controls for it. So why not just do that? Which would be this person right here, the actual record itself. So let's just duplicate that. And because it responds to this here, responds to that, I can actually create 3 things. I can create my header section, my record section, my empty record section. And that's what I'll be doing now. And this is where you can start layering your actual components to leverage the power of the layering. I will just move that to the side. To leverage power, I'm going to make header section first. So this will be my first one, and I'll make sure that I call this header. Bam. I will duplicate it. I'm just going to detach it, create it again, and instead of being a header, I will call this one my record item. Always good to try to add an additional or use a naming convention. And then finally, I'm going to create the empty section, which I'm going to call it empty. Why am I doing this wrong? Empty. Great. There we go. Because I have it layered, all I need to do is actually edit my main piece here, which is my record. Which in some ways, if I wanted to, I could technically call this my row. And this is why I did it like that to begin with, because if it can make it a little less confusing. So if this was my row, then these are different types of rows. And that means I can easily, quickly define what type of cell that I could put in that row. Now we actually had cells, which is great. We actually had this cell, which is your default cell. And we could actually add in a couple of extra cells inside of here. Let's detach those cells. And what I can do is I got my default cell. I'm going to create a new cell and just use all the same stuff. Why not? Give me my header cell. And let's say my header cell doesn't have a background. I'd like my header cell to also have capitalized text. I'd like my header cell to also contain a property which allows me to adjust the text of the header cell, and I will just leave it as a default as name as header, value as header. There we go. Now it's called header. So that's my header cell. It's called header cell. Now I'm going to just make an empty cell. I don't want this cell to have anything in it. I actually want it to be empty, which is perfectly fine. But you don't necessarily, you could just delete this cell, but I like to have a cell because at times I like to switch out elements of an empty cell. So there we go. There is my empty cell. I will create that as a component again. Now I have my cell, my header cell, my empty cell, and now I have all the pieces I need to quite quickly switch this out and adjust for the elements inside of my row. Now this is my header row, which is inside of my row, which is this here. And then these are the cells inside. And if I was to add in additional rows, cells, I just need to put it in one place. Just here. I don't need to put it anywhere else. And then what this does is it populates down the scale here. And as you remembered, I could switch these records out, but instead of switching these records out for this one, I can switch it out for the actual record cell that's identified. The advantage of doing it this way is that I can actually now switch out the top section with this, the bottom section with that. So it's the advantage. Now what I'm going to do is, because I have I have 3 types here, I'm going to make sure I go to my row and grab my row. I'm going to make sure that my row can pick cells from 3 different types. So we're going to actually swap out our instances here. And these will be my cells that I can swap out. I'm going to go in here and I'm going to look for my 3 cells. Actually, you know what I'm going to do? Just to show you a little bit extra tip. If I was to also name this frame, which I will do now, this will be cell elements. Here we go. By doing so, this will be the reference to these cells. So I can select the 4, which I don't need to initially select the 4. I'm probably just going to delete them down to 1 and then just select 1 because life gets a lot easier when you're just dealing with one thing. And you'll see that I have it under cell elements, cell slot, cell empty, so on, which is fantastic. I can add a cell and I can call this cell elements, and I can add those in like that. I will create this, and now I'll have that. Now everything I'm doing is on a black background. As you can see, it automatically did white. An easy way to clear up, or at least add in a background color, is when you have these defaults, just chuck a background on it. I'm going to chuck my background to be similar to the dark black that I have. And as you can see, that goes like that. And what can happen is when I select my row, I can see my cell slot. I can see my cell slots inside my element, and you can see that it's on a black background, which is pretty cool. From here, all that I need to do is actually just expose this up the chain. So in my row, I can go to my elements and my properties, and I can make sure that I can show my actual nested property, which is my cell slot. By doing so, my row can actually see the cell slots. I can pick header and I can adjust for the text. As you can see, it actually, because it keeps the naming, it actually recognizes the text, which is great. And here I can also click on each of these. Oh, actually, maybe not. We'll go here, show nested, which will be that one. That will show my row nested. This was going to show also my row nested, which is showing my slot. So row nested, also showing my cell slot. I can drag off, and now I can actually just simply adjust for my cell slot. So I can make one a header, and I can make whatever. Okay. Really handy. In most ways, you could, in theory, just work with one of these. I like to work with more because I like more flexibility, but you could. As you can see, we have my 3 empty, my record item, my header. I will actually chuck those in an auto layout. I'm going to actually copy this element one because I am very shortly going to turn it into a swappable. So remember, right click, I'll go copy properties. I'm going to go here and just paste that property on there. Now I have my frame. I can give my frame a name. So these are my different table rows. So I'm going to actually just call this table rows. Ooh. Table row. Sometimes my dictation software never works, which is fun. Sometimes it does, and my life gets really easy. All right, I'll make sure that my first table row, I will make sure I'm accessing the actual slot itself. I'm just going to change that to a header. I'm going to call this header. I will also make sure that the other table slot is actually just empty, so that one is going to be empty. And now, because I have my collection, I can easily grab my top slot, and instead of making it the record, I'm going to actually call this something different, because this will be my header section. And the great thing is that you can swap it out for more than just a header section, and that's why I do it this way. So that is my header. We will create that one. We'll make sure that it is actually a different section. So let's actually just swap it out. And let's also swap out the bottom one. Detach that. And that will be that one. There we go. So I have my record slot. I'm going to swap my record slot out for this one. Because I already have it assigned and I have a record assigned to it, I can just go to adjust it here. And instead of using this, I will actually come up to the top here. I'm going to grab that one, tick that one on. I'm just going to tick off my row because we're not actually using the default row. We're using the actual row sections, which is cool. And now I have it and it swaps out from my row sections, which comes out of the record. The great thing is I can now just continue to add to it. So as I do, it will duplicate that. And that's basically our table. And if I was to add at the top, which is this would be my row. If I was to add in additional cells, we'll add in additional cells there. You might not notice that it changes anything to do with the record there, but that is absolutely fine, because when I drag this off and I go to my record and I switch it out, there we go. And there is my records. I can just double check, make sure that they are all filling the way they should. They don't always, and you just have to honestly just make sure that you check inside your tables. And that mostly has to do with these ones actually being fixed one deep down. I just pressed enter to jump all the way down through the layers. There we go. Those ones are filled all the way down to cells. So that is how we can create a table that builds itself and also has all the responsive abilities. All you need to do is take this and this, and you can make as many cells as you need. And you can have the biggest table instantly with all the cells you need inside of your table. So I hope that this has been somewhat helpful. If there are any questions, I'd love to hear some comments, feedback in the chat below. I'm always happy to help, always looking at new ideas. So if you have other ideas that you can do with this, then please share it. We're all here together to help each other. So I hope you find all of this really good. And next time we will be getting into actually building out a more like a table that you would use inside of an actual project. And then we're going to talk about how we can set it up to work for mobile and desktop and make sure that we build off of this design and actually start to deliver something that looks more like what you'll find in other software. So for that, yeah, please subscribe and we will jump into that video next time. Please and subscribe and we will be able to please and subscribe and I will see you in the next video. Catch you next time.